Hello, hello. Welcome back to No Me Callo. I won't stay quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin. And what do you do when the person who loved you the most was also the person who hurt you the most? And what do you do when that person wasn't a bad person? When in fact, they were a good person, a person who was there for you, who made sacrifices for you, who loved you, but who even so left you with wounds that you are still trying to heal from. I think this is one of the conversations that no one wants to have because it is much easier to believe that people are completely good or completely bad. But life has never been that simple, right? Today we're starting a new series that I have decided to call The Conversations No One Wants to Have. Throughout this month, we're going to talk about those conversations that we often avoid, the ones that make us uncomfortable, the one that makes us question things we have always believed to be true, the ones that do not have any easy answers, and the ones that, if I'm completely honest, I have also avoided having for a very long time. Because there are conversations that change the way we see other people, but they also change the way we see ourselves. And this first episode is one of them. Because today I want us to talk about an idea that can be difficult to accept. The good people can also cause harm. And before anyone misunderstands this conversation, I want to clarify something from the beginning. This episode is not about justifying abuse, and it is not about minimizing anyone's pain. And it's not about saying that we should tolerate behaviors that hurt us. Quite the opposite. I believe we can acknowledge the harm someone caused without denying that there was also love. I believe we can accept that someone had good intentions without ignoring the impact their actions had on our lives. And I believe that growing up also means learning to stop seeing the world in black and white, because the world is not divided between good people and bad people. It is filled with human beings who love, who make mistakes, who carry wounds, who fail, and who many times end up hurting the people they love the most without even realizing it. So today I want to ask you a question, and I don't want you to answer it quickly. I want you to really think about it. Can you acknowledge the harm someone caused without feeling like it erases all the good they did for you? Because that is what we're going to talk about today. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. There is something that I have realized over the years, that we love putting people into boxes. It's like we just need to do it, almost as if our brains want everything to be easier to understand. This person is good, this person is bad, this person is toxic, this person is an angel, this person is a hero, this other one's a villain, this boss is the worst, this mom did everything perfectly, as if human beings were characters in a movie. As if they were completely good people and completely bad people. And when someone does something that does not fit the image we have of them, it becomes really difficult for us to process it because we think, but if they were such a good person, how could they do that? Or the opposite. If they did something that bad, then everything good they did before does not count anymore. And the truth is, I think that the way of thinking limits us so much because human beings are much more complex than a single action. How many times have you hurt someone without intending to? I'm not talking about doing something out of malice. I'm talking about those moments when, without realizing it, someone ended up hurt because of something you did or something you failed to do. Maybe you didn't respond to a message because you were exhausted. And to the other person, that silence felt like rejection. Maybe you canceled plans at the last minute because you were going through a difficult time, but the other person thought that they simply were not important to you. Maybe you forgot a birthday or a special date. And even though for you it was just a mistake, for someone else it was a disappointment. Maybe you made a comment that you thought was a joke and one of the things you said without thinking, and years later you find out that the other person still remembers it. Or maybe you were busy surviving, working, trying to handle your own problems. You did not notice someone close to you needed you to be there. And when you finally realized it, it was already too late. And that does not make you a bad person. It makes you a person. Because the reality is that we all have at some point been the cause of someone else's pain. Even if it hurts us to admit it. Even if it was never our intention. Even if we still feel guilty when we think about it today. And I think that that is a very difficult conversation to have with ourselves. Because we like to believe that because we are good people, our actions will always make others feel good. But that is not always true. Good people make mistakes too. They also have blind spots. They also speak from their wounds. They also react from fear, exhaustion, or stress. They can also love deeply and still cause harm. So if we can accept that is true about ourselves, why is it so difficult for us to accept that it can also be true about the people who have impacted our lives? Why when we talk about our fathers, our mothers, our partners, our friends, even a mentor, do we feel like we have to choose only one side? Were they good or were they bad? Did they love me or did they hurt me? What if the answer is that they did both? What if that is exactly the most uncomfortable part of being human? That we can truly love and still leave wounds. That we can have good intentions and still cause pain. And that acknowledging this reality does not mean we stop loving someone. It means we begin to see people as whole, with all the beautiful things they had, and with everything that consciously or unconsciously also left mark on others. Because I believe that only when we stop searching for heroes and villains do we truly begin to understand people. There is a phrase that I've heard so many times, and I think many of us have used it too. But they did it with good intentions. But he didn't mean to cause harm. But she was just trying to help. But your mom just wanted to protect you. But your dad wanted what was best for you, but your boss just wanted to help you grow. And I want to say something. Many times, all of that can be true. Sometimes the people who hurt us are not people who woke up one morning thinking, you know what, today I'm going to destroy someone's life. Most of the time, that is not how it works. Most of the time, harm comes from people who also have their own stories, people who love, people who are afraid, people who are repeating things they learned, people who genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. And that is exactly the hardest part to accept, because it would be much easier if every person who hurt us was a cruel person. It would be much easier if we could say that person was a bad person, period. But what happens when that is not the case? What happens when that person who hurt you was also the person who was there for you when no one else was? What happens when someone who gave you love but also gave you wounds? What do we do with that contradiction? And I think this is where we need to talk about something very important, the difference between intention and impact. Because intentions tells us something about what a person wanted to do, but impact tells us about what exactly happened. And both things can exist at the same time. Someone can have a good intention and still have caused pain. Think, for example, about a father who constantly criticizes his daughter's body. Maybe he says, "You should be more careful about what you eat. You should exercise more. I'm saying this because I care about your health." And maybe from his perspective, he truly believes he is helping. Maybe he thinks, "I'm just preparing my daughter for life. I'm preventing her from having problems. I'm doing this because I love her." But now let's think about the girl who hears those messages every day. A girl who begins to associate love with criticism. A girl who starts asking herself, would my dad accept me more if my body looked different? Would he be more proud of me if I changed? Is there something wrong with me? And years later, that girl may become an adult who struggles with feeling like she is not enough. Not because her father did not love her. Maybe he loved her very deeply, but because the message she received, even though it was not the intention, was different from the love he wanted to communicate. And this example is not to say all parents cause harm. No, it is to recognize something more complex, that even the people who love us can have blind spots, that they may not realize how their words are affecting us. They may think, oh, I'm helping them, while the other person is thinking, I'm just trying to survive this. Another example, a mother who controls absolutely everything, a mother who wants to know where you are, who you're with, what are you doing, what decisions are you making, and maybe someone could say, she is controlling. But let's go deeper. What is behind that behavior? Maybe it's fear. Maybe she grew up in an environment where she learned that if she was not in control of things, something bad would happen. Maybe her way of loving became mixed with the need to protect. And in her mind, she is saying, I just want to take care of you. I just want to prevent you from making mistakes. I just want you to be okay. But for the child growing up with that constant control, the message may feel completely different. It may feel like, they don't trust me. They don't think I am capable. I cannot make my own decisions. And that child may become an adult who doubts themselves, an adult who is afraid of making mistakes, an adult who constantly seeks approval because they never learned to trust their own voice. And here is the complicated part. Both stories can be true. The mother may have deeply loved her child, and the child may have been hurt by that form of love. Both things can exist. And I think many times we confuse understanding with justifying, and they are completely different things. Understanding why someone did something something does not mean saying it was okay. Understanding someone's story does not mean erasing ours. Recognizing that someone was afraid does not mean accepting that their fear controls our lives. Recognizing that someone had good intentions does not mean ignoring the consequences, because good intentions explain, but they do not always justify, and they almost never erase the consequences. And I think this phrase is important because it implies to all of us, because someday in some conversation we could be the person who says, but I was just trying to help. But I did it out of love. But I had good intentions. And maybe someone will respond, I know you did not mean to hurt me, but you still did. And that is one of the hardest things we can learn to hear. Accepting the impact of our actions without immediately defending our intentions. Because growing also means being able to say, I did not mean to hurt you, but I understand that it hurt you, and I want to learn from that. Maybe true maturity is not about proving that we are good people. Maybe it's about having enough humility to recognize that even while being good people, we can still cause harm. And that does not have to destroy us, but it does have a way to transform us. And I think many adults reach this point where they say, but my parents did everything for me. And yes, they probably did. They worked, they sacrificed, they gave you food, they gave you an education, they gave you opportunities, but still they left you with wounds. And saying that does not mean that you do not love them. Recognizing a wound is not an act of betrayal. It's an act of honesty. Tired parents, parents who were surviving, parents who did the best they could with the tools they had. But having an explanation does not erase the child's experience. And here comes the uncomfortable part of this conversation. Because up until this point, we have talked about the harm that other people have caused us. We have talked about parents, about people we love, about people who had good intentions but still left wounds. And it is very easy to listen to these stories and think, yeah, that happened to me. Or yeah, I know someone like that. Or yes, I completely understand what she's talking about. But now I want to change the direction of this conversation. Because there is a much harder question. A question that we do not always want to ask ourselves. What happens when we are that person? What happens when we are the good person who still hurts someone? And I want to say something from the beginning. I believe that we've all been there. All of us. Not because we are bad people, but because we are people. Because sometimes we think that causing harm means being a cruel person. That causing harm means having bad intentions. But many times, harm comes from much more complicated places. It comes from our own wounds, from our own insecurities, from our past experiences, from the ways we learn to protect ourselves. And sometimes the same things that help us survive at one point in our lives can end up hurting other people. And I want to share something personal because I don't think this conversation would make any sense if I stood here talking as if I've never made any mistakes. As if I have never been part of someone else's pain, because I have more than once. And I've had to recognize that. I've had to look back at moments in my life and say, wow, I understand why I reacted that way. But I also understand that I hurt that person. And I think that is one of the hardest things to accept, because our brain immediately wants to defend us. It wants to say, but I had a reason, but I was going through something, but that person hurt me too. And maybe all of that is true, but the question is not only, why did I do what I did? The question is, how did I make the other person feel? For example, something about me, if you know me, is that I'm a very direct person. And for a long time, I thought being direct was always a strength. I thought, well, I'm just saying the truth. I am honest. I'm not a fake person. And yes, honesty is important. Transparency is super important. But over the years, I have learned something, that the truth also needs empathy, because you can say something true and still say it in a way that hurts someone. You can be right and still make someone feel small. I remember moments where my intention was to help, where I thought, I am telling them because I want them to improve. I'm being honest because I care. But later I had to learn that not everyone receives the truth in the same way. And that sometimes what felt like being direct to me could feel like criticism to someone else, like they were not enough, like I was only seeing their mistakes. And that was a difficult lesson for me, because I had to accept that my intention could be good, but my way of communicating could still cause harm. I've also had to work a lot on my expectations, because I am someone who has very high expectations of myself, of the people around me, and of relationships. And for a long time, I thought, well, if I give my maximum effort, it makes sense to expect others to do the same for me. But life has taught me that not everyone loves the same way. Not everyone shows commitment the same way. And not everyone has the same emotional abilities. Not everyone everyone is in the same place of growth. And when we expect someone to be exactly like us, sometimes we stop seeing who they really are. We start seeing the version we wanted them to be. And when that person does not meet that expectation, well, we become disappointed. We become frustrated, and we can end up making someone feel like they are never enough. And I think another area where I had to be very honest with myself is when someone has hurt me. Because I think many of us do this. Someone breaks our trust, someone disappoints us, and someone makes us feel betrayed, and our brain tries to protect us. So we think, well, if that person did this, then the next person will probably do the same. And if it happened to me once, I will not allow it to happen again. And yeah, that makes sense because no one wants to feel pain again. But the problem is when we start punishing new people for wounds that they did not create. When someone new comes into our lives, but we're still fighting with someone from our past. When someone tries to show us that they are different, but we have already decided that we cannot trust them. When someone offers us love and we respond from fear. And the truth is, I've had to recognize moments where I did that, where I was not only reacting to the person in front of me, I was reacting to previous experiences, to previous wounds, to things I had not fully processed yet. And even though my intention was to protect myself, I could also be hurting someone who was not responsible. And I think this is one of the most human parts of this conversation. Sometimes our wounds explain our behavior, but they cannot become an excuse for not changing because we all have a story. We all have reasons. We all have moments where someone hurt us, but we also have the responsibility to ask ourselves, am I using my pain to understand myself, or am I using it to justify hurting others? Because the reality is this, we may be the good person in some stories, but also the person who caused pain in someone else's story. We've been the friend who was not present, the partner who did not listen, the family member who said something that left a mark, the coworker who did not understand what someone else was experiencing. And saying this is not meant to fill us with guilt. Guilt keeps us stuck. Responsibility allows us to grow. And the question is not, have I hurt someone? Because the answer for all of us is probably yes. The most important question is, what do I do when I realize it? Do I defend myself? Do I blame the other person? Do I say that they're exaggerating? Or do I have the humility to listen and say, maybe it was not my intention, but I want to understand your experience? Because maybe the true sign of a good person is not never making any mistakes. Maybe the true sign of a good person is having the ability to recognize when they have made a mistake, to learn, to change, and to do it differently the next time. Because being a good person does not mean never causing any harm. It means being willing to look at the harm you caused and choosing to grow from it. And as many of you know, for years I have been working with survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence. And I learned something that completely changed the way that I see people. And I think it also changed the way that I understand harm, love, power, and human relationships. Because before working in this field, like many people, I also had a simpler idea of what a victim looked like. I thought of a victim as someone who was obviously being hurt, someone who clearly identified the person who harmed them, and someone who knew that person is bad, that person did this to me, and that person does not love me. But the reality, the human reality, is much more complex than that. And one of the hardest things for many people to understand is that someone can miss the person who hurt them. And when we hear that from the outside, many times we judge. We say, how can they miss someone who hurt them? How can they defend them? How can they still love them? But when you start listening to the full stories, you understand something very important. People do not experience their relationships only through the harm. They also experience them through moments of connection, through moments when that person was kind, through moments when that person was present, through moments when that person made them feel important. And this does not mean that the harm did not happen. It does not mean that what happened was okay. And it does not mean that the person who caused harm should be protected from consequences. It means that human beings can have extremely complex relationships. A person can feel fear and love at the same time. They can feel hurt and still miss someone. They can know that something was wrong and still have good memories. Because the human heart does not work like a computer where you can erase everything good when something bad appears. And I think this is one of the reasons why black and white thinking can be so dangerous. Because when we expect all victims to act like a certain way, we stop seeing real people and we think, if they were truly a victim, they would leave. If they had really suffered, they would never speak positively about that person. If something really happened to them, they would have not had feelings for that person. But the reality is that trauma, manipulation, emotional dependency, survival, and human relationships are much more complicated. And if we don't understand that complexity, we can end up judging people who need support the most. And I have also seen this when we talk about families, because many times there is the idea that if someone experienced harm within their family, then the entire family has to be bad. But many stories do not work that way. There are families where there is love. There are families where there are sacrifices. And there are families where parents did so much for their children. At the same time, there is also wounds. There are things that were never talked about. There are patterns that were repeated. There are ways of communicating that cause harm. There are emotional needs that were never met. And accepting that can be extremely difficult because many people believe that acknowledging harm means saying, my family was bad. My parents did not love me. Everything was a lie. And many times that is not the truth. Sometimes the truth is much more complicated. Sometimes the truth is they loved me in the way they knew how to love, but that way was also a way that hurt me. And I think something similar happens when we talk about people who cause harm, especially when we talk about human trafficking and domestic violence, because many people want a simple answer. They want to know who is the bad person and who is the monster. And while there are people who make conscious decisions to exploit, control, and harm others, we also need to understand that human dynamics are complex. Some people who cause harm also have histories of trauma. Some come from environments where they learned violent patterns. Some people repeated cycles they have never questioned. But I want to be very clear here. Understanding does not mean justifying. Explaining does not mean excusing. And having a difficult history does not give you any permission to destroy another person's life, because we can hold two truths at the same time. A person can have suffered and can also have caused harm. A person can have wounds and is also responsible for their actions. A person can have a complicated story and still need to be held accountable. And this idea has been fundamental in my work because survivals do not always look the way we expect. They do not always react the way we expect, and they do not always tell their stories the way we expect. Some may be angry. Some may defend the person who harmed them. Some may return to that person. Some may struggle to trust. Some may make decisions that we don't understand from the outside. But our job is not to judge whether someone is a good victim. Our job is to listen, to ask questions, to walk alongside them, to create spaces where people can feel safe. Because when we stop seeing people as simple stories, we can begin to respond better. We can ask better questions. We can create better systems. We can provide support that truly considers the human experience. And I think this is one of the biggest lessons I have learned from working with survivors. People are not only the worst thing that happened to them, and they are not only the best thing that they have done. People are a combination of experiences, choices, wounds, strengths, and contradictions. And if we want to help people, we have to be willing to see them fully, even when their story is complicated, even when it's not easy to understand, even when it forces us to have uncomfortable conversations, because many times the hardest conversations are the ones that teach us the most about humanity. So after talking about all of this, after accepting that people are more complex than we think, and after recognizing that someone can love us and still hurt us, and after recognizing that we also may have been the person who caused harm, the question is, what do we do with this information? Because it is easy to talk about the complexity of human beings. It is easy to say people have many layers. People have complicated stories. People can make mistakes. But when that person is someone who hurt us, when that person has a name, when that person is someone we love, when that person left a wound in our lives, that is when this conversation becomes much more difficult. And I want to clarify something very important. This conversation is not about starting to justify everyone. It is not about saying, well, everyone has a reason, so no one is responsible. No, because understanding someone does not mean removing their responsibility. Understanding someone's story does not mean erasing the impact. Having empathy does not mean accepting that someone continues to hurt us. And I think sometimes we are afraid to look at the humanity of someone who hurt us because we think, well, if I understand why they did it, then I'm saying it was okay. But that is not true. You can understand why a person behaved a certain way and still say, that hurt me. You can recognize that someone had a difficult childhood and still say, what they did to me was not acceptable. You can understand that someone acted from fear and still decide, I need to step away to protect my peace. Because one of the most important things I want you to take away from this entire episode is this: understanding does not replace boundaries. And I want to repeat that because I think many people need to hear it. Understanding does not replace boundaries. Sometimes we think that if we're empathetic people, if we are people who try to understand others, then we have to tolerate everything. We have to give more chances. We have to forgive quickly. We have to maintain relationships because that person had a difficult life. That person did not have the tools. That person suffered too. And yes, maybe all of that is true, but it is also true that you deserve to be safe. You deserve respect, and you deserve relationships where you don't have to lose yourself in order to understand someone else. You can recognize that someone has good intentions and still decide to create distance. You can understand their story and still protect yours. You can accept that someone did the best that they could and still recognize that what they did was not enough to give you what you needed. And I think this is where forgiveness comes in, because forgiveness is a word that is often used in a way that can cause harm, especially when people are told, just forgive, just let it go. It happened such a long time ago, as if forgiveness was simply forgetting, as if forgiveness meant saying it was not that serious, as if forgiveness meant allowing someone back into our lives. And that is not necessarily true. Forgiveness does not mean denying what happened. Forgiveness does not mean saying it was okay. Forgiveness does not mean you have to give someone access to your life again. Forgiveness also does not mean that someone automatically deserves a second chance. Sometimes forgiveness is simply choosing not to carry something you no longer want to carry every single day. Sometimes forgiveness is saying, this happened, it hurt me, it changed a part of me, but I will not allow this pain to control my entire life. And something I have learned is that there is a huge difference between reconciliation and forgiveness, because many times people confuse the two, but they are different things. Reconciliation requires two people. It requires accountability. It requires change. It requires the person who caused harm to acknowledge it, and it requires action, not just words. You cannot rebuild a relationship simply because one person is ready. You can forgive someone and never speak to that person again. You can release resentment and still maintain your distance. You can understand someone and still decide that they no longer have a place in your life. And that does not make you a bad person. That can also be self-love. Because I think sometimes we believe that setting boundaries means we stop having compassion. But I believe boundaries can also be a form of compassion. Compassion toward others because we stop participating in harmful dynamics. And compassion toward ourselves because we stop abandoning ourselves to keep others comfortable. And I want to bring this back to ourselves, because this conversation is not only about the people who hurt us, it is also about the people we have hurt. What do we do when we recognize that we were that person? When someone tells us, what you did hurt me. The way you spoke to me hurt me. Your absence affected me. You made me feel like I did not matter. What do we do? Do we immediately defend ourselves? Do we say, but I did not mean to do it? Do we say, but you also did things? Or do we say, it was not this serious? Or can we have the humility to listen? Because one of the hardest things for any human being is accepting, I might have had good intentions and still cause harm. But that sentence should not destroy us. It should help us grow. Because if we are only good people when no one questions us, then our goodness depends on never looking at our mistakes. But true transformation begins when we can look at our uncomfortable parts, when we can say, I do not like admitting this, but I understand that this person had a different experience than I did. So if this conversation made you think about someone, maybe a parent, a partner, a friend, or even yourself, I want you to remember something. People can be complex. They can have light and darkness. They can have given us love and also pain. But recognizing someone's complexity does not mean denying our own experience. Your pain is still valid. Your boundaries are still valid. Your story is still valid. Because at the end, the goal is not to decide who is the hero and who is the villain. The goal is to learn how to see people with more humanity without forgetting to protect our own humanity too. And as always, I want to recommend you a book, and the book is called Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me by Carol Travers and Elliot Aronson. This book explores why it's so difficult for human beings to admit when we are wrong. It talks about how our brains try to protect the image we have of ourselves, especially when our actions do not match the idea that we are good people. And I connected to this episode because many times we think, if I'm a good person, then I could have never caused harm. But the reality is that we can have good intentions and still hurt hurt someone. We can love someone and still have behaviors that leave wounds. This book invites us to ask ourselves an uncomfortable but necessary question. Am I trying to understand the impact I had on someone, or am I looking for an explanation to avoid accepting my responsibility? Because growing does not mean never making mistakes. It means having the humility to recognize when we did and learn from it. So I highly recommend it. So I want to leave you with a question, and I don't want you to answer it quickly. I want you to take a moment and really think about it. What would happen if we stopped asking ourselves, was this person a good person? And instead we started asking something different. How did their actions impact my life? Because I think many times we get stuck trying to decide who is right, trying to put a label on someone, trying to answer questions that seem easier. Was she a good mother? Was he a good father? Was he a good partner? Was she a good person? As if the answer to that question could erase everything else. As if saying, yes, they were a good person meant that our pain does not matter. Or as if saying that, no, this person hurt me meant that all the good that existed was never real. But maybe life does not work that way. Maybe one of the hardest parts of growing is accepting that some people can occupy more than one space in our story. Someone can have been an important person in our life and still have hurt you. Someone can have loved you and still have not known how to love you in the way you needed. Someone can have made sacrifices for you and still have left wounds that you are still trying to understand. And accepting that reality can feel uncomfortable because we want simple answers. We want to know who was the good person and who was the bad person and who was at fault. But maybe true maturity is not about finding villains. Maybe it is about learning to look at the complete story of others, but also our own. Today we talked about the people who have hurt us, but we also have to have the humility to ask ourselves, when were there moments that I was the person for someone else? When did my wounds speak louder than my love? When did I defend my intentions without listening to the impact I had? Because at the end of the day, we are all people in progress. We all have parts of ourselves that are beautiful, parts that love, parts that help, parts that inspire. But we also have parts that need to grow, parts that need to heal, parts that need to be questioned. And maybe that is a conversation that no one wants to have. Accepting that people are not only good or bad, they are human. And being human means having contradictions. It means making mistakes. It means learning. It means recognizing when we cause harm. And it means deciding what we do after we realize it. So if this episode made you think about someone you loved, someone who hurt you, someone you are still trying to understand, or even yourself, I want to remind you of something. Recognizing someone else's complexity does not mean denying your own experience. You can have compassion and have boundaries. You can understand someone's story and still protect your own. You can recognize the good in someone without having to deny what hurt you. Because maybe the question was never, was this person a good person? Maybe the most important question has always been, how did their presence in my life make me feel? What did I learn from that relationship? What wounds do I need to heal? And what patterns do I need to break? And how can I become a person who loves better and hurts less? Because at the end, the goal is not to live searching for perfect people. The goal is to learn how to build relationships with real human beings, people with light, people with shadows, people who have stories that explain who they are, but also have the responsibility to decide who they want to become. In the description of this episode, you will find the Amazon link with the complete list of books mentioned on No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode to today's. And don't forget that every Friday there is a new episode waiting for you. The next episode of this series is called The Hard Truth About Helping Others. Because what happens when the way we help others can also cause harm? Because we almost never question the idea of helping. We think that if our intentions are good, then our actions automatically are too. But what happens when helping becomes controlling? When we stop listening because we believe we already know what someone needs. When we focus more on fixing someone's life than understanding their story. In this episode, we explore one of the most difficult conversations within helping spaces. Are we truly supporting people? Or are we trying to make them fit into the idea of what we believe they need? In this conversation, we will talk about the difference between rescuing and walking alongside someone. When help stops being support and begins to become control. How our good intentions can have have unexpected consequences. Why listening is one of the most powerful ways to help. The role of privilege, power, and humility in our helping relationships. What my experience in social work, human trafficking, and survivor services has taught me about truly supporting others. Because sometimes the hardest part is not finding the solution. Sometimes the hardest part is sitting with someone's story long enough to truly understand what they actually need. Helping is not about becoming the hero of someone else's story. It is about recognizing their humanity, respecting their voice, and walking alongside them. So I will leave you with a question to reflect on. Are we helping people become who they want to become? Or are we trying to turn them into who we believe they should be? So don't miss it. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.